Welcome to AP Biology. This video is an introduction and an overview to cell respiration. Organisms require energy in order to perform work. Heterotrophs obtain energy from the food that they eat. However, the chemical energy found in food is not directly usable to the organism. Instead, they have to break down the chemical energy in food and use that in order to regenerate ATP, the cell's usable energy source. This ATP is then going to be used to power all cellular work. The process in which food molecules are broken down to make ATP is called cell respiration. Cell respiration takes place in an organelle called the mitochondria. Cell respiration is the opposite process of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is going to take place in the chloroplasts of producers. During photosynthesis, light energy is going to be taken in and converted into chemical energy, the energy found in organic molecules. Oxygen is also going to be produced as a waste product of photosynthesis. During cellular respiration, organic molecules are broken down in order to regenerate ATP. This ATP is going to power most cellular work. The waste products of cell respiration are going to be carbon dioxide and water, which in turn are going to be the reactants in photosynthesis. So you can see that these two processes really work hand in hand with each other. There are a number of catabolic pathways that are going to break down organic molecules in order to release energy. Each of the chemical reactions in the catabolic pathway are exergonic, they're energy releasing pathways. Here you see the three different pathways that can be used to break down organic molecules. The first one is fermentation. Fermentation occurs in the absence of oxygen. Sugar is going to be broken down. The major pathway that's going to create ATP is going to be aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration takes place when organic molecules are broken down in the presence of oxygen, and this is going to yield the most ATP. Anaerobic respiration is very similar to aerobic respiration, except that it uses a different molecule other than oxygen. Some bacteria use molecules like sulfur instead of oxygen during their respiration. The major difference between aerobic respiration and fermentation is that aerobic respiration utilizes oxygen, fermentation does not. Without oxygen, the cell is not able to extract as much ATP from the food that is consumed, from the organic molecules. Here you see the equation for cell respiration. The preferred molecule to enter cell respiration is glucose, C6H12O6. The equation for cell respiration is glucose plus oxygen is going to yield carbon dioxide, water, and energy. This energy is going to be a combination of ATP, and heat is also going to be released as a waste product. This is a catabolic pathway that's made up of exergonic reactions. You can see that energy is released, and the energy released is used to make ATP, the body's usable energy source. It's important to note that we trace glucose going through the process of cell respiration, but numerous carbohydrates, numerous fats, and numerous proteins can also enter cell respiration, which they will be broken down and used to produce ATP. The chemical reactions that take place during cellular respiration are redox reactions. Redox reactions involve the transfer of electrons between reactants. In particular, one reactant is going to get oxidized, the other reactant is going to get reduced. To be oxidized means that you lose electrons. To be reduced means that you are going to gain electrons. We call this reduction because the charge is actually reduced as you gain a negatively charged electron. Here we see an example of a redox reaction. Here you see the reaction that takes place between sodium and chlorine in order to make sodium chloride. Sodium is going to get oxidized. It's going to lose an electron, which is why it goes from sodium to a sodium ion, Na+. It's lost an electron. Chlorine is going to get reduced. It's going to gain the electron and become Cl negative, chloride. So the electron literally went from sodium over to chlorine. Sodium gets a positive charge, chlorine gets a negative charge, creating sodium chloride. The electron donor is called the reducing agent. A reducing agent causes the other reactant to get reduced. That means that it itself gets oxidized. It's causing something else to get reduced. The electron receptor is called the oxidizing agent. The oxidizing agent causes the other reactant to get oxidized, so it itself is actually getting reduced. It's a difficult concept to understand. We'll see an example of it right now. Here we see the burning of methane, which is really just the oxidation of methane gas. So methane is CH4, and here you see the chemical reaction. CH4 plus O2 is going to yield carbon dioxide energy in the form of heat and water. During this chemical reaction, methane gets oxidized. It's going to lose its electrons. Whenever you lose electrons, you're also going to lose protons or hydrogen ions along with it. A proton is always going to travel along with the electron. CH4 gets oxidized, it loses its electrons, and it becomes carbon dioxide. The electrons are being transferred from methane to oxygen. Oxygen gets reduced and it becomes water. And you can see here as it gains the electrons, it's going to gain the protons along with it. Oxygen is considered an oxidizing agent, and that's what really makes oxygen such an important part of cell respiration, is its role as an oxidizing agent. It's a very strong oxidizing agent because of its electronegativity, because of its strong pull of electrons. You can see here that oxygen causes methane to get oxidized. It itself gets reduced and becomes water. Methane in return is the reducing agent. It's going to cause oxygen to get reduced, so it itself is going to get oxidized. Here you see the equation for cell respiration again. If I could define cell respiration in one sentence, I'd define it as the oxidation of glucose. During the process of cell respiration, during all these exergonic reactions, we are systematically pulling all the electrons out of glucose. Glucose is getting oxidized. All the electrons that come out of glucose are ultimately, in the end, all going to go to oxygen. The oxygen is going to get reduced and it's going to become water. Again, you can see that when oxygen gains the electrons, it's going to gain the protons along with it. Glucose is going to get oxidized into carbon dioxide. You can see again, oxygen is the oxidizing agent. it's causing glucose to get oxidized. It itself is going to get reduced. As these electrons are pulled away from glucose and ultimately sent to oxygen, energy is going to be released. And that energy released as glucose is systematically getting oxidized is what's going to be used in order to regenerate ATP. Now, I said that the electrons don't immediately go from glucose to oxygen. Instead, they go through an intermediate called NAD+. NAD+ is considered an electron carrier. It's going to carry the electron from glucose over to oxygen. So glucose is going to get oxidized. NAD+ is going to get reduced. When NAD+ gets reduced, it becomes NADH. Notice again, when it gains the electron, it's also going to gain a proton along with it. NADH is an electron carrier. It's going to carry that electron over to oxygen. So if we revisit this diagram here, the electron is going to go from glucose to NAD+. NAD+ is going to become NADH. Forgive my handwriting. And then this NADH is then going to carry the electron over to the oxygen. In order for NADH to carry the electron to the oxygen, it's going to carry the electron to a structure within the mitochondria called the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain is the most important part of aerobic cellular respiration. Here we see what's going to happen. NADH is carrying the electrons to the electron transport chain. When NADH reaches the electron transport chain, it gets oxidized. It loses its electrons, it loses its protons. These electrons are going to go down the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain is a controlled reaction that has a number of steps. When the electron gets all the way down the chain, waiting for it at the end is going to be oxygen. Oxygen is going to grab onto the electrons, oxygen is going to grab onto the protons, and it's going to become water. The important part of the electron transport chain is that the electron is going to be passed down a series of steps. This controls the release of energy from these electrons, and that controlled release of energy is what's used to regenerate ATP. If all the energy was released at one time, if those electrons did not flow down an electron transport chain, we'd have an explosive release of heat and light. And heat is not a usable energy source. You can't use heat to do anything. It can't power cellular work. Only ATP can. So here you see the most important process that we're going to view in more depth during cell respiration, the electron transport chain. And its goal is to control the release of energy in order to maximize the amount of ATP that is made. This ATP is then going to fuel all cellular work. This concludes our overview of cell respiration.